I spoke with Benghazi Select Committee Chair, Congressman Trey Gowdy, about this and more. Take a look. Congressman Gowdy, thanks so much for being here. This week, the House Oversight Committee held a hearing on the gross incompetence in the DEA. I have to tell you that I was somewhat shocked, but even more shocked by Michelle Leonhardt, who's the top dog at the DEA. Does this woman know what she's doing?
Well, if she does, she didn't prove it during our hearing. I do give credit to Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Cummings. They are of one voice when it comes to oversight on the Drug Enforcement Administration. And Judge, you used to work with law enforcement, and I used to work with law enforcement. And it really, I take no great joy in having a conversation with any law enforcement agent like the one we had this week. But it was necessary because law enforcement enjoys special privileges and powers and rights in our society, and with that comes a corresponding responsibility. And to allow the drug cartel, that, by the way, you are supposed to be investigating, to provide prostitutes to you and suffer the meager consequences that these agents suffered is really impossible to explain.
Well, you know, Congressman, what's even worse is that apparently the cartel took custody or possession of their phones and their laptops and their weapons and all this stuff when the men were having sex with the prostitutes. What do you think they were doing with that stuff? Protecting it?
No, ma'am. I think they were accessing information, or certainly they had an opportunity to do so. But how's the prosecution going to go? I mean, that's why you investigate folks, right? With an eye towards prosecuting them. You have to extradite them and then prosecute them. How's that prosecution going to go when the agents that are investigating these cartel leaders are availing themselves of prostitutes? The other issue, Judge, is are the prostitutes underage? Or were they the victims of human trafficking? It runs so counter to everything that we want out of our law enforcement. And then to not be able to lose your security clearance because, and you may remember that point in the hearing where she said she can't fire them and she can't revoke their security clearances, and she's supposed to be the head of the DEA.
Well, you know, what's even worse, when you say you can't prosecute them, you know, or how do you prosecute them with this kind of trail? Here's the bottom line, Congressman. They're not going to be prosecuted because they're going to be extorted. I mean, it's very simple. There will be no prosecution. But before we get into the human trafficking and the underage and all the great questions that you asked about these young women who were having sex with the DEA agents, my concern is this woman, Leonhardt, who heads the Drug Enforcement Administration, all right? She has known about this for years. This is the one area, according to the Inspector General, where they kind of short-shrifted it, shoved it under the carpet, and then she says, I can't fire, I can't transfer, I can't suspend. I mean, the woman is stupid, okay? Congressman, I'll say it. The woman is stupid. Now, I ran a DA's office. You ran a DA's office. You were a United States attorney. Since when does the person in charge not able to fire someone or put the mechanism in place?
You are right, and that's why Elijah Cummings and Jason Chaffetz both immediately after that hearing published a letter where they have no confidence in her, which is tantamount to their saying she ought to be replaced.
Let's talk about the fact that this woman knew about it for years and that she did nothing about it, and now she says she can't do anything about it. Why does this woman have a job? If you're going to be in law enforcement, you got to be a tough broad, okay? You've got to be a woman who's able to say you're going to do this, this, and this. I have fired people publicly for getting into an accident, using a county car, and then cavorting around with women, that kind of thing. I just fire them. I don't care what the law is. Law enforcement, there is a certain standard that we expect of them. So why does this woman still have a job? Does this speak to the Obama administration and their refusal to have any kind of moral compass at all in their agencies?
Well, the last hearing we had that went similar to this one was the head of the Secret Service, and she was replaced almost immediately. And if anyone in the administration watched this hearing, I think that they will make the conclusion that they probably would benefit from a change in leadership, which is exactly what Jason and Mr. Cummings called for. I would not take a job where I had to keep employees that engage in this kind of conduct. And to your point, I think what you do is you fire them, and then you let them carry the burden of persuasion before whatever board they need to appear before to say that they were unjustly terminated. But to simply give people paid vacation for doing what these agents did, and then having to have the Inspector General be the one to expose it because you didn't do it yourself, We all deserve better, regardless of who's in charge of the administration.
Well, it wasn't just paid vacations. They got bonuses and promotions. So enough about the DEA. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton. She's supposed to give you an answer as to whether or not she's going to appear before your committee on May 1st. Now, I'm not even going to ask you if you're going to subpoena her. Why don't we have the server?
Well, Judge, our committee is not a standing committee, as you know. It's a select committee, and we have to operate within the rules. And I have the power to subpoena people and documents, but not tangible things. The House as a whole may get to the point where it does subpoena the server, but you have to keep in mind, Judge, the power to subpoena is only as good as the power to compel. So let's assume that Boehner writes a subpoena out tomorrow. And let's assume further that her attorney and she do not comply and don't produce the server.
You're not going to hold her in contempt. That's what you're saying.
Well, but what happens in the past when we hold people in contempt?
Exactly.
It's referred to the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia. He won't even prosecute Lois Lerner.
Exactly.
So, which is a pretty clear case to me. So it's the limitations of the legislative branch. And what I want is access to the information and the documents. I don't want the legal drama. So if I can be uncharacteristically courteous and give her an extra 2 weeks and get what I want, I would rather do that than go through the drama of a floor fight when I know with Fast and Furious and the IRS and all these other investigations, we wind up in court and it's 3 years before a judge decides to give us an answer, and people have lost interest and their attention has moved on to something else. I want the information. I do not want the theatrics and the drama.
Let me just say that there are a couple of people that I think are very important there. You've got Uma Abedin on the same private server. You've got Cheryl Mills, you know, on that server. Cheryl Mills, the one who told everyone, or Greg Hicks, not to talk to Chaffetz when he went over there in Benghazi. I mean, you know, as you can put together all the lines here, but you know what my fear is? My fear is that Scooby-Doo and the Scooby-Doo van are going to take over what should be a very important issue for the American people to understand.
And I'll tell you, Judge, that I think the American people are fully engaged because they have really high expectations of their public officials. And if we can carry the burden of persuasion, which is a pretty easy burden to carry, that the public and the media and Congress should have access to the entire public record of anyone who has been Secretary of State, whether it's Secretary Clinton, Secretary Powell, Secretary Rice. Those documents belong to us. And she alone does not get to be the sole arbiter to determine what's public and what's personal. And that's a pretty easy burden of persuasion to carry. And I think the public will wind up being on our side, and they expect her to come and answer some pretty legitimate questions.
Well, you know what, from your lips to God's ears, and hopefully the public does understand how important this is. But I want to thank you, Congressman Trey Gowdy, for being with us today.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Coming up, and